I heard my daughter say it like I wasn't even in the room. Mom's story is already over. She just doesn't know it yet. They laughed, quietly, comfortably, like my life had already been folded up and put away. I didn't say a word. I just kept staring at my plate, memorizing that moment. Because an hour later, sitting alone in my quiet house, my phone rang. "Mrs. Gallagher?" the man said. "We're ready for your final chapter." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I smiled, because they were right about one thing. This was the end of my story, just not the way they thought. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you the most, I'd really like to hear your story. Go ahead and like this video if you've ever had to prove someone wrong quietly. And if you're listening right now, tell me where you are and what time it is. I read every single comment, and tonight I don't feel so alone. The morning after that dinner, I woke up at exactly 5:12 a.m. I know the time because I stared at the ceiling for a long while before I reached for my glasses and checked the clock, as if seeing the numbers would somehow anchor me back into something steady. It did not. The house was quiet in the way it had been for years now. Not the peaceful kind of quiet people talk about when they say they enjoy living alone. This was a different kind, a hollow quiet, the kind that echoes even when nothing moves. I sat up slowly, my joints reminding me that time had indeed passed, whether my family believed my life had meaning or not. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I walked to the kitchen. Same route, same steps, same routine. Coffee first, always coffee. I filled the kettle and waited. The small hiss of the stove felt louder than it should have been. It always did in the mornings. I used to make breakfast for 4 in this kitchen. Eggs, toast, sometimes pancakes if I had enough time before work. Back then, mornings were loud. Chairs scraping. Diane complaining about being late. Mark asking where his shoes were even when they were exactly where they always were. Now the only voice left was mine, and even that I rarely used out loud. I poured the coffee into my favorite chipped mug. It had a faded quote on it from one of my old students. "You made me believe I could matter." I remember the girl who gave it to me. Quiet. Always sitting in the back row. She used to turn in essays that were so full of doubt you could feel it in every sentence. I still had every one of those essays. I carried my mug to the small table by the window. The same seat I had taken every morning since Thomas passed away. 23 years now. Long enough for grief to change shape, but not disappear. Outside, the street was empty. A delivery truck passed slowly, then nothing again. I took a sip of coffee and let my mind drift back to the night before. Mom's story is already over. Diane had said it so casually, like she was stating a fact, not even cruel, just certain. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the words themselves, but how easy they had come to her. Mark had not even disagreed. He had just nodded, as if I had already become something finished. I set the mug down carefully because my hand had started to tremble, and I did not want to spill it. Not because of the mess, just because I did not want to give myself one more thing to clean up. I stood up and walked down the hallway. There is a door at the end of that hallway that stays closed most of the time. It is not locked. I have never needed to lock it. No one comes here uninvited anymore. Still, I paused in front of it, my fingers hovering near the handle. For a moment, I almost walked away. Then I opened it. The room smelled faintly of paper and time. Not unpleasant, just still. Like something waiting. Stacks of notebooks lined the shelves. Loose pages sat neatly organized in boxes. Old drafts, newer revisions, handwritten notes in margins that only I could fully understand. My desk stood by the window, exactly where I had left it the night before. A yellow legal pad sat on top, filled with my writing from the past week. The pen I used was still resting diagonally across the page. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. This was the one place in the house where I did not feel invisible. I ran my fingers lightly over the edge of the desk, then sat down slowly in the chair. It creaked in the same familiar way it always had. For a long moment, I just looked at the pages in front of me. Words. So many words. Years of them. Stories I had written and rewritten. Moments I had preserved because I was afraid they would disappear otherwise. Lives that had brushed against mine, sometimes only briefly, but enough to leave something behind. I picked up the pen, then I stopped, because I could still hear Diane's voice. She just doesn't know it yet. I let out a slow breath and set the pen back down. Maybe she was right about one thing. Maybe I had been living as if my story was something that had already happened, something I looked back on instead of something I was still shaping. The phone rang. I did not jump this time. I knew who it was. I reached for it steady now. Hello? Something. I looked back on instead of something I was still shaping. The phone rang. I did not jump this time. I knew who it was. I reached for it steady now. Hello, Mrs. Gallagher. Daniel Brooks said, his voice calm, professional, but there was something else there too. Something almost anticipatory. I hope I'm not calling too early. No, I said quietly. I was already awake. I wanted to confirm that the documents were finalized this morning, he continued. Rachel reviewed the latest edits. She said, and I quote, "This is exactly what we've been waiting for." I closed my eyes for just a second. Exactly what we've been waiting for. Not something finished, something ready. When do we proceed? I asked. There was a brief pause on the other end. Whenever you say the word. I looked down at the pages on my desk. At the years of my life that had been reduced, refined, reshaped into something that could finally be seen. Not just by strangers, but by the people who had already decided it did not matter. I'll let you know, I said. Of course, Daniel replied. Take your time, but I will say this, Mrs. Gallagher. Yes, you're about to change more lives than you realize. The call ended. I sat there in silence for a while after that. Then I stood up and walked back into the kitchen. The coffee had gone cold. I did not bother reheating it. Instead, I grabbed my coat from the chair by the door. Because there was something I needed to do. Not for Daniel, not for Rachel, not even for the book. For me. As I stepped outside, the morning air hit my face, cool and sharp. And for the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I was walking through the remainder of something. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something that had not yet begun. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could still hear Diane's voice. Only now it sounded different. Because this time, I knew she was wrong. People have a way of rewriting your life when you stop correcting them. I learned that slowly. Not all at once. It did not happen the day Thomas died, or the day I packed away his clothes, or even the first night I slept alone in that too large bed. Back then, people still asked questions. They still wanted to understand. But over time, something changes. People stop asking, and they start assuming. By the time Diane was in her 30s, she had already built a version of me in her mind. One that was simple, manageable, easy to explain to her friends. My mom was just a teacher. Just, it is a small word. but it can erase an entire lifetime if you let it. I remember the first time I heard her say it out loud. We were at a neighborhood gathering, one of those polite suburban barbecues, where everyone smiles a little too much and listens a little too little. A woman had asked Diane what I used to do. She taught English at a public high school, Diane said with a quick shrug. Nothing too exciting? Nothing too exciting. I stood a few feet away, holding a paper plate I had no appetite for, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even sadness, just distance. Because the truth is, Diane was not entirely wrong. I did teach English. I did work in a public high school, and on paper, there was nothing remarkable about that. But what she did not know, what neither she nor Mark had ever asked, was everything that lived beneath that simple description. They never asked what I turned down. They never asked what I chose. They never asked why. I walked back into my study that afternoon after speaking with Daniel Brooks, and for the first time in years, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. There are things you keep not because you need them, but because you are not ready to let them go. Inside that drawer was a manila folder worn at the edges, slightly bent, from being moved too many times and opened too rarely. I hesitated before pulling it out. It is strange how something so small can feel so heavy. I placed it on the desk and sat down slowly. For a moment, I just rested my hand on top of it. Then I opened it. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age, but the words were still clear. Sharp. Alive. Dear Ms. Gallagher, we are pleased to inform you. I smiled faintly. I had read that letter so many times in my younger years that I could still recite it without looking. It was from a publisher in New York. A real one. Not a small press or a local newsletter. A company that had taken interest in something I had written. Something I had poured myself into during late nights when the children were asleep and the world was finally quiet. They had wanted to publish my work. They had called it remarkable. They had said it had the potential to reach a wide audience. I remember sitting at this very desk, reading those words for the first time. My hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. And in a way, it did. Just not in the direction anyone expected. Because 2 days after that letter arrived, Mark came down with a fever that would not break. Diane was struggling in school, quietly in ways she never admitted back then. I could see it in her grades, in the way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day. And Thomas was already working longer hours trying to keep everything together after the layoffs at his company. We were not falling apart, but we were close enough that I could feel the strain in every corner of our home. I held that letter in my hands and realized something very simple. There are moments in life when you get to choose who you are going to be. Not in theory, in action. I could have said yes. I could have taken the offer, traveled to New York, met editors, chased something that had been quietly growing inside me for years. Or I could stay. I could be present in a way that no one would ever write about. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I called them. I'm honored, I said. Truly, but I'm going to have to decline. There was a pause on the other end of the line. May we ask why the woman had said gently? I remember looking toward the hallway where I could hear Diane arguing with Mark about something small and unimportant, because I said there are things I need to finish first. At the time, I believed that was the end of it, that the door had closed, and maybe it did, for a while. But life has a way of circling back to the things you leave unfinished. I placed the letter back into the folder and closed it carefully. For years, I told myself that decision had not cost me anything. that I had chosen what mattered most. And I still believe that. But what I did not realize, what I refused to see, was that the story did not end there. It simply paused. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Diane had grown up believing I never had a chance. Mark believed I had never taken one. Neither of them knew that I had stood at a crossroads and made a choice they were never aware of. And maybe that was my fault. I never told them. Not because I was hiding it, but because at the time it felt unnecessary. You do not explain your sacrifices to your children while you are making them. You just make them. And you hope that one day somehow they will understand. I looked around the room again. At the notebooks, at the pages filled with stories that had never been sent, never been shared, never been finished. Or at least, not until now. Because the truth was, I had not stopped writing after that letter. Not even close. If anything, I had written more. But the stories had changed. They were no longer about imagined characters or distant worlds. They were about real people, real lives, real students who had sat in my classroom and believed just for a moment that they might become something more than what the world had decided for them. I stood up and walked over to the shelf, pulling down one of the older notebooks. I flipped it open. Names, dates, fragments of conversations, moments I had captured before they disappeared. This was what I had been building all along, not a single story, but a collection of them, lives that had intersected with mine in ways my own children had never seen. I ran my hand over the page gently. They think I did nothing, I whispered to myself. The words did not sound bitter, just factual. I closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. Then I looked toward the desk where the latest version of my manuscript sat waiting to be finished, waiting to be seen, waiting to become something real. I picked up the pen again. This time, I did not hesitate, because for the first time in years, I understood something clearly. I had not given up my story. I had simply been writing it in a different way. And now, it was finally time for someone else to read it. The second call from Daniel Brooks came 2 days later. I was in the grocery store when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, right there between the canned soup aisle and the display of discounted bread. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Old habits. For years, most calls had either been reminders telemarketers or Diane asking if I could pick Lily up from school. But something about the timing made me reach for it. Hello, Mrs. Gallagher. Daniel said, his voice steady as always, but there was an unmistakable urgency beneath it this time. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad moment. I glanced down at the cart in front of me, half filled, ordinary things. Milk, eggs, a loaf of bread I did not really need. No, I said quietly. What is it? There was a brief pause, as if he were choosing his words carefully. We've received a formal offer. I felt my grip tighten slightly on the phone. What kind of offer? An advance? He replied. A significant one. I turned the cart, slowly moving toward a quieter corner of the store, away from the hum of conversation and the squeak of wheels on tile. How significant? I asked. Another pause. 7 figures. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. I'm sorry, I said. Could you repeat that? 7 figures, Mrs. Gallagher. Daniel said again, more gently this time. They believe your manuscript has national reach. Possibly more. The world around me seemed to dim, not dramatically, but just enough that everything else faded into the background. 7 figures. For something I had written in the quiet corners of my life. for something no one in my own family had ever asked about. I see, I said, because I did not trust myself to say anything more complicated than that. They would like to move quickly, he continued. Rachel is already coordinating with their editorial team. There's interest in a full release, potentially even a speaking tour. A speaking tour? I almost laughed at that. The idea of standing in front of strangers telling them about a life my own children had dismissed felt surreal. Are you still there? Daniel asked. Yes, I said softly. I'm here. Good, he replied, because there's something else you should know. I leaned lightly against the shelf beside me, my free hand resting on the cool metal. They want you involved, he said, not just as the author. They want your voice, your presence. They believe the story matters because of you. Because of you. I closed my eyes for just a moment. For years, I had told myself that the stories mattered more than I did. That my role was simply to observe, to guide, to record. But now someone was telling me that I was part of the story too. What do you need from me? I asked. For now, Daniel said, just your confirmation. Do you want to move forward? It was such a simple question, yes or no. I looked down at my cardigan, at the quiet evidence of a life that had become small, manageable, predictable. Then I thought about the room at the end of my hallway, the notebooks, the years of work that had lived in silence. I need a day, I said finally. Of course, he replied without hesitation. Take all the time you need, but I will say this. Yes, this opportunity doesn't come twice. I almost smiled. He was right. But what he did not know, what no one knew, was that in a way, it already had. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. I'll be waiting. The line went quiet. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still in my hand, the noise of the store slowly returning around me. 7 figures. A national release. A speaking tour. Words that belonged to a life I had once imagined and then carefully set aside. I pushed the cart forward again, finishing my shopping in a kind of quiet haze. I paid at the register, exchanged polite smiles with the cashier, and walked back out into the parking lot as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The drive home felt longer than usual. Not because of traffic, because of memory. I could see Diane at 16 slamming her bedroom door because I had insisted she finish her homework before going out. I could see Mark at 10 sitting at the kitchen table struggling with a math problem, his frustration slowly turning into tears. I could see myself moving between them, trying to hold everything together, one small decision at a time. And somewhere in between all of that, I had let go of something that had once felt like my own future. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel. If I said yes, everything would change. Not just for me. For them. Because suddenly, the version of me they had grown comfortable with, the quiet, aging mother whose life had already been written, would no longer exist. I stepped out of the car and carried the groceries inside. The house greeted me with its usual silence. I set the bags on the counter and began unpacking them slowly, deliberately. Each item placed where it belonged. Order, routine, control. Things I had relied on for years. When I finished, I did not go to the kitchen table. I walked straight down the hallway, past the photos on the wall, past the memories that had already been framed and simplified into something easier to understand, and I opened the door to my study. The manuscript was still there exactly where I had left it. I walked over to the desk and placed my hand on top of it. This changes everything, I said quietly. Not as a question, as a statement. I pulled out the chair and sat down. Then I opened the first page. For years, I had written these stories as if they were something separate from me, something that could exist without requiring anything in return. But now that was no longer true. Now the story was asking something of me, to be seen, to be heard, to step forward. I turned to the last page I had written. The ending was not finished, not yet. And suddenly, I understood why. Because the final chapter had never just been about the people in those pages. It had always been about me, too. I picked up the pen, and this time, when I began to write, I did not hold anything back. I did not tell anyone, not Diane, not Mark, not even Lily, though she had become the one person in the family who still looked at me as if I might have something left to say. Keeping a secret at my age is different than it used to be. When you are young, secrets feel like something heavy, something that might slip out if you are not careful. You guard them tightly, afraid that one wrong word will expose everything. But when you are older, secrets become quieter. They sit beside you. They wait. They do not demand attention. And sometimes they give you something you have not had in a long time: control. That evening, I sat at my desk with the contract in front of me. Rachel had emailed it earlier that afternoon. The subject line alone had made me pause before opening it. Final agreement. Draft Gallagher manuscript. Seeing my name, they're attached to something that felt real. Something that extended beyond the walls of my house, stirred something deep inside me. I adjusted my glasses and began to read. The language was formal, precise. Legal phrases layered over intentions that were at their core simple. They wanted the book. They wanted it published nationally. They wanted me involved in the process, and they were willing to invest in it in a way I had never imagined. 7 figures. Even now, the number felt unreal. I reached for my pen, hovering just above the signature line. Then I stopped. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood that once I signed, there would be no returning to the quiet version of my life I had been living. Once I signed, the door would open, and not just for strangers. For my family, they would see, whether I told them or not. I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet again. It always was in the evenings. But tonight, the silence felt different. Full. As if something was waiting just beneath the surface. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. Diane? I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hi, Diane. Hey, Mom. She said, her voice distracted, like she was doing 3 things at once. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I suppose so, I replied. Why, I need you to watch Lily for a few hours, she said. Something came up at work. Of course it did. Something always came up. What time? I asked. Around 2. I'll drop her off. She did not ask if it was okay. She assumed. Yes, I said simply. Great, she replied quickly. Thanks, Mom. I owe you one. You owe me one. I almost smiled at that, not because it was amusing, because it was familiar. We ended the call, and I placed the phone back on the desk. Then I looked down at the contract again. I wondered briefly what Diane would say if she knew. If she knew that the same woman she casually relied on for childcare was about to sign an agreement worth more than anything she had ever imagined. Would it change how she spoke to me? Would it change how she saw me? Or would she simply find a way to fit this new information into the version of me she had already decided on? I did not know. And for the first time, I realized I did not need to. The next afternoon, Lily arrived right on time. She walked into the house with her usual quiet energy, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes scanning the room as if she were always looking for something more. "Hi, Grandma," she said, stepping forward to hug me. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, wrapping my arms around her gently. She pulled back and looked at me for a moment, her brow slightly furrowed. "You look different," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" she shrugged. "I don't know. Just different." I smiled faintly. Children notice things adults choose to ignore. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you something to eat." We spent the afternoon the way we usually did. Homework at the kitchen table, a snack she barely touched, a conversation that drifted between school friends and small observations about the world that only she seemed to notice. At some point, she looked up from her notebook and said, "Mom says you've been busy lately." I kept my voice steady. "Have I?" She nodded. "She thinks you're doing something." I met her eyes. "And what do you think?" I asked. Lily hesitated. Then she said something that made my chest tighten in a way I was not prepared for. "I think you've always been doing something," she said quietly. "They just never noticed." For a moment, I could not speak, because in all the years of being misunderstood, no one had ever said it that simply. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "That's very kind of you," I said. She shrugged again, a small smile forming. "It's just true. We did not talk about it again after that." But her words stayed with me. That evening, after Diane picked her up and the house returned to its usual quiet, I walked back into my study. The contract was still there, waiting. I sat down and picked up the pen once more. This time, I did not hesitate, because I understood something clearly now. This was not just about proving anyone wrong. Not Diane, not Mark, not even the version of myself that had once believed the story was over. This was about finishing something I had started. Years ago, in a different life. I signed my name slowly, carefully, letting each letter settle into place. Brent Gallagher. When I finished, I set the pen down and looked at the signature. It felt final, but not in the way Diane had meant. Not an ending, a turning point. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. "They think it's over," I whispered to myself. Then I shook my head slightly. "No," I said a little more firmly this time. "It's just beginning." It started with a conversation that wasn't meant for me to hear. But then again, the most important truths in my life rarely were. It was 3 days after I signed the contract. I had settled into a strange rhythm, one that felt both familiar and entirely new. Mornings were still quiet. Coffee still cooled faster than I drank it. The house still echoed in the same hollow way. But underneath all of it, something had shifted. There was a current running through my days now. A quiet awareness that something was moving forward, whether anyone else saw it or not. That afternoon, Diane stopped by unannounced. She knocked once, then let herself in before I could reach the door. "Mom," she called out. "In the kitchen," I replied. She walked in quickly, her phone pressed between her shoulder and ear, speaking in that clipped tone she used when she was trying to sound in control. "Yes, I understand," she said into the phone, "but we need to finalize this before the end of the month." She paused, listening. "No, I'll handle it," she added. "Just send me the updated numbers." She ended the call and exhaled sharply, placing her phone on the counter. Busy, I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She gave a short laugh. Always, I nodded and poured her a glass of water without asking. Old habits. She accepted it, taking a sip before glancing around the kitchen. You've been quiet lately? She said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. I've always been quiet. Not like this, she replied. You've been, I don't know, distant. I almost smiled at that. It was interesting how people only noticed your absence when they expected something from you. I've just been keeping to myself, I said. She studied me for a moment as if trying to decide whether that answer satisfied her. It didn't, but she let it go. Well, she said, shifting her weight slightly. I actually came by to talk about something. Of course she did. What is it I asked? She hesitated just for a second. Then she said it. Mark and I have been thinking it might be time to start making some decisions about the house. I felt something inside me go very still. The house, I repeated. She nodded, her tone practical, almost rehearsed. It's a lot for you to manage on your own, and the market's good right now. We could sell it, split the money, maybe find you something smaller, easier. Split the money. Not help me, not support me. Split the money. And where would I go? I asked quietly. She shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. A condo, maybe, or a senior community. Somewhere with less maintenance. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere easier. Somewhere contained. I turned, slightly resting my hands on the edge of the counter to steady myself. I see, I said. Diane stepped closer, her voice softening just a bit. We're just trying to think ahead, Mom. It's not like you're getting any younger. There it was. Not cruel, not loud, but final. As if my life had already reached its conclusion, and all that remained was to organize the aftermath. Before I could respond, the front door opened again. Mark walked in without knocking as usual. Hey, he said, glancing between us. You started without me? Diane rolled her eyes. We were just talking about the house. Mark nodded, as if he had expected that. Yeah, he said, setting his keys down. It makes sense. We should probably list it before winter. Before winter. As if it were already decided. As if I were not standing right there. I looked at both of them. My children. The two people I had built my life around for so many years. And for the first time, I saw them clearly. Not as they had been, but as they were now. Practical, efficient, focused on outcomes, and completely unaware of the line they were crossing. Have you already decided this? I asked. Mark shrugged. We've talked about it. That's not what I asked. I said, my voice still calm, but firmer now. Diane crossed her arms slightly. We're trying to help you, she said. You don't need a house this big anymore. I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked the question they hadn't expected. And what do I need? Silence. They looked at each other briefly, then back at me. Well, Mark said slowly, something simpler. Something that makes sense at this stage. This stage. I nodded once, then I straightened. No, I said. The word hung in the air between us. Simple, clear, unfamiliar. Diane blinked. No, I repeated. Mark frowned slightly. Mom, you're not being realistic. I met his eyes. No, I said again this time, with a quiet certainty that surprised even me. You're not listening. The room went still. Because this was not how I usually spoke. Not to them, not to anyone. I'm not selling the house, I continued. Not now. Not because it's convenient, and certainly not because you've decided my life has reached a point where I should start giving things away. Diane's expression shifted, something defensive rising to the surface. "That's not what we're saying," she insisted. "It is exactly what you're saying," I replied gently. Mark shook his head. "We're just trying to plan ahead." I nodded. "I understand that," I said. "But you're planning a future that isn't yours to organize." Another silence. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because there was nothing to argue with. "Not really." Diane exhaled, her frustration clear now. "Fine," she said. "If you want to keep the house, that's your choice. But don't expect us to deal with it later when it becomes a problem." I held her gaze. "I won't," I said. She looked away first. Mark grabbed his keys again, muttering something under his breath as he headed toward the door. Diane followed a moment later. Neither of them said goodbye. The door closed, and just like that, they were gone. I stood there for a long moment, the quiet returning in its familiar way. But it did not feel the same, because something had changed. Not in them, in me. I walked slowly back down the hallway, past the photographs that told a simpler version of our story. Then I stepped into my study. The manuscript sat where I had left it, unchanged, waiting. I moved toward the desk and rested my hand on it. "They think I have nothing left," I said quietly. But the words did not carry pain anymore. They carried something else. Clarity. Because now, more than ever, I knew exactly what I had. And for the first time, I had said no. It did not take long for them to start watching me. Not openly, not in a way they would admit. But I could feel it. A shift in the air whenever Diane spoke to me on the phone. A hesitation in Mark's voice when he stopped by, as if he were trying to listen for something beneath my words. Suspicion has a quiet way of growing, and once it starts, it does not need much to feed it. It began with the mail. For years, my mailbox had been predictable. Bills, advertisements, the occasional card from someone who still remembered I existed outside of family gatherings. But now, envelopes started arriving that did not fit that pattern. Thicker paper. Return addresses from New York. Names Diane and Mark would not recognize, but would certainly notice. I was careful. I always have been. I collected the mail as soon as it arrived. I sorted it quickly. Anything that mattered went straight into my study. But one afternoon, I was too late. Diane had stopped by again. She said she was in the neighborhood. Said she just wanted to check on me. I had heard that phrase enough times to know what it meant. She wanted to see for herself. I was in the backyard when she arrived, pulling weeds that did not really need pulling, just to keep my hands busy. "Mom," she called, stepping through the back door. "Out here," I replied. She joined me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground as she walked. "You really should get someone to take care of this," she said, glancing around the yard. "I like doing it myself," I answered. She gave a small nod, though it was clear she did not understand. Diane has always believed that anything worth doing should be efficient. She has never trusted slow work, or quiet work, or anything that does not produce visible results. We went back inside after a few minutes, and that was when I saw it. The envelope, sitting on the kitchen counter, already opened. My name printed clearly across the front. Gallagher Manuscript Office. Diane was holding the contents in her hand. "What is this?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. I took a step forward, my eyes moving from the paper to her face. "It's correspondence," I said. "From who?" she pressed. "From people I'm working with." She frowned slightly. Working with. There it was. Confusion. Then doubt. Then something sharper. "Mom," she said slowly, "what exactly are you doing?" I did not answer right away. Not because I did not have an answer. Because I was deciding how much she deserved to hear. Before I could speak, Mark walked in. He must have arrived while we were outside. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Diane handed him the paper. "Read this." Mark scanned it quickly, his expression tightening as he went. "This is some kind of contract," he said. "It's not finalized," I replied calmly. "That's not what I asked," he snapped. "What is this?" I met his gaze. "It's a publishing agreement." The words landed heavier than I expected. Diane blinked. Publishing, yes. For what Mark asked. For a book. Silence. A long one. Then Diane let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're writing a book," she said. "Have been," I corrected gently. "For how long?" Mark asked. "A long time." He shook his head. "Why didn't you tell us?" I almost answered that question honestly. "Because you never asked. But I chose something simpler. Because it wasn't ready," I said. Diane crossed her arms, her expression shifting again, this time to concern. "Mom," she said, her voice softening, "this doesn't look right." I tilted my head slightly. "What doesn't this?" she said, holding up the paper. "These kinds of things, people get scammed all the time. Especially..." She stopped herself. "Especially people like you. Older. Alone. Vulnerable." She did not need to say it out loud. I heard it anyway. "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly. "But I know what I'm doing." Mark exhaled sharply. "Do you..." The question hung in the air. Not just doubt. Challenge. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not even frustration. "Just, I appreciate your concern," I said evenly. "But I know what I'm doing." Mark exhaled sharply. "Do you?" The question hung in the air. Not just doubt. Challenge. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not even frustration. Just certainty. "Yes," I said. Diane stepped closer, her voice more urgent now. "Mom, listen to me. You're talking about contracts, money, people you don't know. This isn't like helping someone with homework or volunteering at school. This is serious." "I know," I replied. "Then let us look at it," she insisted. "We can have a lawyer review it. Make sure everything's legitimate." I almost smiled at that. A lawyer? If only she knew. "That won't be necessary," I said. Mark shook his head again, more forcefully this time. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You think you know what you're doing, but you don't. And if this goes wrong, we're the ones who are going to have to fix it." "We." "Not me. We." As if my decisions were automatically their responsibility. As if my life still belonged to them in some way. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "No," I said, quietly. They both stopped. Because there was something in my voice they were not used to hearing. "If this goes wrong," I continued, "I will deal with it." Diane's eyes widened slightly. "Mom." "And if it goes right," I added, "I will deal with that too." Another silence. This one heavier, because now they were no longer trying to understand. They were trying to regain control. Mark folded the paper and set it back on the counter. "You're making a mistake, because now they were no longer trying to understand. They were trying to regain control." Mark folded the paper and set it back on the counter. "You're making a mistake," he said flatly. "Maybe," I replied. Diane looked at me, searching my face for something, anything that would tell her this was temporary. That I would come back to the version of myself she understood. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said softly. I held her gaze. I already was, I said. She flinched slightly, because she understood exactly what I meant. Neither of them spoke after that. They left a few minutes later, quieter than usual, less certain, more unsettled. And when the door closed behind them, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the envelope they had opened, at the words they had not believed, at the future they could not yet imagine. Then I picked it up carefully and carried it back down the hallway, into the one room they still did not fully understand, my study. I placed the papers back on my desk and smoothed them out gently. They're starting to notice, I whispered. But the words did not carry fear, only inevitability, because this part of the story was never meant to stay hidden. The email arrived at 6:43 a.m. I know the exact time because I had not been sleeping well, and I was already awake sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had gone untouched. The house was still wrapped in that early morning stillness, the kind that makes even the smallest sound feel important. When my laptop chimed, I looked at the screen immediately. Rachel Klein, subject line, "We need to talk today." I felt a slight tightening in my chest, not fear, anticipation. I opened the message. "Brent, we've just received confirmation. The publisher wants to accelerate the timeline. They're moving your release forward, and there's been unexpected interest. I'd like to discuss next steps as soon as possible. Call me when you can." Unexpected interest. I read the line again, then again. Something was happening, faster than we had planned, faster than I had prepared myself for. I reached for the phone and dialed her number before I could think too much about it. She picked up on the second ring. "Brent," she said, her voice warm but energized. "I'm glad you called. What's going on?" I asked. "There was a going on," I asked. There was a brief pause, the kind that comes right before something shifts. "Your manuscript," she said, "it didn't just get accepted, it got noticed." I leaned back slightly in my chair. Noticed how there's already internal buzz of pause, the kind that comes right before something shifts. "Your manuscript," she said, "it didn't just get accepted, it got noticed." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Noticed how there's already internal buzz," she explained. "Editors are passing it around. Marketing teams are getting involved earlier than usual, and—" She hesitated, and I prompted. "There's interest from media," she said. Media. The word felt foreign. Interviews, she continued. Features. Possibly even a televised segment down the line. I let out a slow breath. This was no longer just about a book. This was about visibility, exposure, a version of my life being placed under a light I had never stood in before. I didn't expect it to move this quickly, I admitted. "Neither did we," Rachel said. "But this is what happens when something resonates. Resonates." I looked down at the manuscript on my desk, at the years of quiet work that had led to this moment. "They're asking about you," she added. "About me," she said. "Your background, your story. They want to understand the person behind the pages." I almost smiled. For so long, I had lived as if that part of me did not matter, as if the stories could stand on their own. But now they wanted the whole truth. "When do they want to start?" I asked. "Soon," she replied. "Very soon. We'll guide you through it very soon. We'll guide you through it, of course. You won't be doing this alone." Alone? That word had defined so much of my life in recent years. But now it was being replaced by something else. Presence. "All right, of course. You won't be doing this alone." Alone. That word had defined so much of my life in recent years. But now, it was being replaced by something else. Presence. All right, I said quietly. Tell me what I need to do. We spoke for nearly an hour after that. About timelines, about expectations, about things I had never imagined needing to consider. Public appearances, interviews, even the possibility of a reading event. By the time we ended the call, the sun had fully risen, casting soft light through the window of my study. I sat there for a long moment, letting everything settle. Then I stood up. Because there was something I needed to prepare for. Not the interviews, not the release. Something closer. Something immediate. Because if the outside world was starting to notice, it would not be long before my family did too. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. Diane. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello, Mom, she said, her voice tighter than usual. Did you talk to Mark today? No, I replied. Why? He got a call, she said. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. A call from who? Some publishing office? She said. They were asking to confirm family details for background information. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they had. They said your name, she continued. Your full name. Brent Gallagher. Silence settled between us. What is going on? She asked. There it was again. Not curiosity this time. Concern. And something else. Uncertainty. I took a slow breath. It's about the book, I said. What book, she demanded. The one I told you about. You didn't tell me anything, she shot back. I let that sit for a moment. Then I corrected her. I tried, I said, gently. You didn't listen. She went quiet, only for a second, but it was enough. Mom, she said, her voice lowering. This is serious. People don't just call this is serious. People don't just call families for no reason. I know, I replied. Then explain it to me, she insisted. I looked around the room, at the desk, at the pages, at the life they had never fully seen. It's going to be published, I said. How big families for no reason. I know, I replied. Then explain it to me, she insisted. I looked around the room, at the desk, at the pages, at the life they had never fully seen. It's going to be published, I said. How big, she asked. I hesitated, not because I was unsure, because I knew what the answer would do. National release, I said. Another silence. Longer this time. Mark said something about money, she added carefully. Is that true? I could hear it in her voice now. The shift. The recalculation. Yes, I said, how much I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. That's not important, I replied. It is important, she said quickly. Mom, this affects everything. Everything. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said quietly. It affects me. She exhaled sharply. You're being difficult, she said. No, I replied. I'm being clear. There was a pause. Then she said something that made the entire situation settle into place. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I closed my eyes, because this was the question she should have asked years ago. Not about the book, about everything. I've been here the whole time, I said. She did not respond, because she understood. Not fully, not yet, but enough. We need to talk about this, she said finally. Yes, I agreed. Well, come by tonight, she added. We. Of course. All right, I said. The call ended, and just like that, the quiet was gone. Because for the first time, they were coming not to manage me, not to plan my future, but to understand something they had already dismissed. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The street outside looked the same as it always had. Still, ordinary. But inside the house, everything was about to change. And this time, I was ready for them to see it. They arrived together. That in itself told me everything I needed to know. Diane never coordinated with Mark unless something felt serious to her, important, urgent, something that required control. I heard their car pull into the driveway just after 6. I did not rush to the door. For years, I had been the one who adjusted, the one who hurried, the one who made sure everything was ready before they stepped inside. Not tonight. Tonight, I stayed where I was, in the study, at my desk, surrounded by the one part of my life they had never taken the time to understand. The knock came firm and deliberate, then the door opened before I could answer. Mom Diane called. "In here," I replied. There was a pause, then footsteps. Slower this time, more cautious. They had never come into this room together before. I heard them stop at the doorway, and I knew without looking that they were seeing it for the first time. Not just a room, a life. "Wow," Mark said quietly. I turned slowly in my chair. "This is where you've been working." Diane said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it in this house. "Yes," I replied. They stepped inside. Mark's eyes moved across the shelves, the stacks of notebooks, the carefully organized papers. Diane walked toward the desk, her gaze lingering on the manuscript. "This is all yours?" she asked. "It always has been." She reached out, hesitating just slightly before touching the top page. "You never showed us any of this," she said. I met her eyes. "You never asked." The words were not sharp, but they landed that way. She withdrew her hand. Mark cleared his throat, trying to shift the conversation back into something he could manage. "Let's just talk about what's going on," he said. I nodded. "That's why you're here." They exchanged a quick glance, then Diane spoke first. "The call today," she said. "They said they needed family background for media purposes." "Yes." "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means the book is moving forward," I said. "Faster than expected." How fast? Mark pressed. "Soon," I replied. "Very soon." Diane shook her head slightly, trying to process it. "I don't understand," she said. "You were just here, living your life, and now suddenly, I've always been here," I said gently. She stopped, because again, she understood what I meant. Not fully, but enough to feel it. Mark stepped forward, his tone more direct. "How much are we talking about?" he asked. There it was, the question beneath all the others. Not curiosity, not concern, value. I leaned back in my chair. "Why does that matter?" I asked. "Because it does," he replied quickly. "This isn't just a hobby anymore. This is something that affects me," I interrupted calmly. He frowned. "It affects the family," he corrected. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "It affects me." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Diane stepped in again, trying to soften it. "We're just trying to understand what's happening," she said. "You've kept this from us for years." I considered that for a moment. Then I shook my head. "I didn't keep it from you," I said. "I lived it. You just didn't see it." Her expression shifted, not defensive this time. "Hurt!" "Mom," she began. But she didn't finish, because there was nothing to argue with. The truth does that. It doesn't need to raise its voice. It just stands there until you either accept it or walk away. Mark looked around the room again, at the notebooks, at the evidence. How long, he asked quietly. Since before you both moved out, I said. He blinked. You've been writing this whole time? Yes, and we didn't know. No. Diane sat down slowly in the chair across from my desk. I thought she said, then stopped. What did you think I asked? She hesitated. Then she said it. I thought you had stopped doing anything for yourself. The words were softer than before, less certain, more honest. I nodded. I know, I said. Mark leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. So, what happens now? He asked. I turned slightly, resting my hand on the manuscript. Now I said it gets published, and after that, he pressed. I looked at him, really looked, because this was the question that mattered, not the money, not the timeline, the after. After that, I said slowly, people will read it. And then Diane asked, and then I continued, they'll see what you didn't. The room went still, because this was no longer about a book. It was about perspective, about truth, about everything they had overlooked. Diane swallowed. What does that mean for us? She asked. I leaned forward slightly. It means nothing changes, I said. They both looked confused. What Mark said? You're still my children, I explained. I'm still your mother. Then what's different? Diane asked. I held her gaze. You know who I am. Silence again. But this time it was different. Not defensive, not resistant, just quiet. Because something was shifting. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Mark exhaled slowly. I think we underestimated you, he said. I almost smiled. Not just me, I replied. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I gestured lightly toward the shelves. You underestimated everything I chose not to show you. I almost smiled. Not just me, I replied. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I gestured lightly toward the shelves. You underestimated everything I chose not to show you. Diane looked around the room again, her eyes lingering on the notebooks. All of this, she whispered. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? She asked again. This time, I answered differently. Because I didn't need you to believe in it, I said. I just needed to finish it. That was the moment, the one where everything changed. Because for the first time, they were not seeing me as someone who needed help, or guidance, or correction. They were seeing me as someone who had lived an entire life without their understanding, and had still succeeded. Diane stood up slowly. I think she said, then stopped. What I asked. She met my eyes. I think I was wrong. The words were quiet, but they carried more weight than anything she had said before. Mark did not speak, but he didn't argue either. And sometimes silence is its own kind of admission. I nodded once, not in victory, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. Because this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something they had never expected, and for the first time, they were standing inside it. The shift did not happen overnight, but once it began, it was impossible to ignore. Diane started calling more often, not to ask for favors, not to arrange something convenient for her schedule, but to ask questions, real ones. How long have you been writing? she asked one evening, her voice quieter than usual. Long enough to forget when I started, I replied. She laughed softly at that, but there was no dismissal in it this time. No impatience, just curiosity. Mark was different. He did not ask questions. He observed. He came by 2 days after our conversation, standing in the doorway of my study again, but this time, he did not rush to speak. He just looked. At the shelves, at the notebooks, at the pages he had never known existed. You kept all of this, he finally said. Yes. Why I considered the question. Because I wasn't finished, I said. He nodded slowly, not because he fully understood, but because he was starting to. And that was enough. But the real shift came from somewhere I had not expected. Lily. She arrived that Saturday morning with a notebook of her own. She did not say anything at first. She just walked into my study like she belonged there, like she always had. Then she sat down across from me and placed the notebook on the desk. I started writing, she said. I looked at it, then at her. What are you writing about? I asked. She shrugged. People, she said. Like you do. Something inside me softened. Would you like to read it to me? I asked. She nodded, and for the next 20 minutes she read. Her voice steady, her words simple but honest, unfiltered, real. When she finished, she looked up at me waiting, not for approval, for truth. It's good, I said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. But more than that, I added, it's yours. She smiled, and in that moment I realized something I had missed for years. I had not lost everything by staying. Some of it had simply grown in ways I had not noticed. Later that afternoon, Diane came by again. But this time, she did not walk in like she owned the space. She knocked and waited. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Hi, she said when I opened the door. Hi. She hesitated. Then she said, Can I come in? I stepped aside. Of course, we sat in the living room this time. Not the kitchen, not the study. A neutral space. She looked around as if seeing it differently now. As if realizing that this house, this life, had always been more than she had assumed. I've been thinking, she said. I waited. I didn't know you, she admitted. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I thought I did, she added quickly. I thought I understood who you were, what your life had been. And now I asked. She looked down at her hands. Now I think I only saw the parts that were easy for me to see. I nodded. That's human, I said. She looked up at me surprised. You're not angry? She asked. I considered that. I was, I said honestly, at times. She swallowed. I'm sorry. The apology came quietly, without defense, without justification. Just. She looked up at me surprised. You're not angry, she asked. I considered that. I was, I said honestly, at times. She swallowed. I'm sorry. The apology came quietly, without defense, without justification, just truth. And that made all the difference. Thank you, I said. We sat in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just real. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for. What's the book about? I smiled faintly. People, I said. She laughed softly. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters, I replied. She tilted her head slightly. Will I recognize myself in it? She asked. There it was, Fear. Not of me. Of truth. I met her gaze. Not in the way you think, I said. She exhaled, relieved. But you might recognize something else, I added. What? The things you didn't see. She went quiet again, because now she understood what this really was. Not just a story, a mirror. Mark joined us later that evening. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, as if he were still unsure of his place in this new version of things. We need to talk, he said. Diane glanced at him. About what? She asked. He looked at me. About the house, he said. The word hung in the air. Not as a demand this time, as a question. I waited. He took a breath. I was wrong, he said. Diane looked at him surprised. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. I thought we needed to make decisions for you, he continued. Because I assumed you weren't making them for yourself. I said nothing. Because this was his moment, not mine. But I see now. I thought we needed to make decisions for you, he continued. Because I assumed you weren't making them for yourself. I said nothing. Because this was his moment, not mine. But I see now, he added, his voice tightening slightly. You've been making decisions all along. We just weren't paying attention. I nodded once. That's true. He stepped further into the room. So the house stays, he said. Yes, no more discussions about selling it, he added. Correct. He nodded. Then after a pause, he said something I had never expected to hear. If you need anything, let me know. Not control, not instruction, support. I almost smiled. I will, I said. And for the first time in years, I believed it. That night after they left, I walked back into my study. The room felt different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because something had shifted in the way it was seen. Not just by me, by them. I sat down at my desk and opened the manuscript. The final chapters were coming together. Faster now. Clearer. Because the story was no longer waiting to be understood. It was being lived. I picked up my pen and began to write. And as the words flowed across the page, I realized something that made me pause. This was not just the last chapter of a book. It was the first chapter they would finally read. And this time, they were paying attention. The first interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Rachel had warned me it would feel strange. Just be yourself, she had said. That's what they're interested in. I had almost laughed at that. For years, being myself had been the one thing no one seemed interested in. Now suddenly, it was the only thing that mattered. The call came through right on time. A woman named Carolyn Hayes, a senior editor from a national magazine. Her voice was warm, practiced the kind that made people feel at ease, even when they were being asked difficult questions. Brent, she said, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Of course, I replied. We've all been reading your manuscript, she continued, and I have to say, it's remarkable. I said nothing. Not out of modesty, out of habit. Praise had never been something I expected. It feels very personal, she added. Very lived. It is, I said simply. She paused. Then she asked the question I knew would come. Did your family know about this while you were writing it? I leaned back slightly in my chair. They knew parts of me, I said, but not this part. And how do they feel about it now? She asked. I hesitated, not because I did not have an answer, because the answer was still unfolding. They're learning, I said. Caroline hummed softly, as if she understood more than I had said. "That must be complicated," she noted. "It is," I replied. "But it's also necessary." We spoke for nearly 40 minutes about the book, about the stories inside it, about the years that had shaped it. But more than anything, we spoke about perspective. "What do you hope people take away from this?" she asked near the end. I looked down at my hands, then back at the screen. "That a life doesn't end just because someone stops paying attention to it," I said. She smiled. "That's powerful," she said. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the quiet returning slowly around me. But it was not the same quiet anymore. This one felt full, alive, as if something had been set in motion that could not be undone. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. A message from Diane. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back, "Yes." She arrived less than an hour later. This time, she did not hesitate at the door, but she did not rush either. She stepped inside with a kind of awareness that had not been there before. "I saw something online," she said. I nodded. "The interview." "Yes." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "They quoted you," she added. "What did they say?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she repeated it. "A life doesn't end just because someone stops paying attention to it." I felt a small, quiet shift inside me. Hearing my own words reflected back made them real in a way I had not expected. Diane swallowed. "Was that about us?" she asked. There it was, the question beneath everything. I met her gaze. "It was about my life," I said. She nodded slowly. "But it felt like it was about us," she admitted. I did not deny it, because sometimes truth does not need to be explained. It just needs to be recognized. She sat down across from me. "I didn't realize," she said softly. "Realize what?" "How much we've missed," she replied. I leaned back slightly. "You didn't miss it," I said. "You just didn't look." She winced. "Not dramatically, but enough." "I thought I knew you," she said. "I know," I replied. "And I didn't," she added. "No," I said gently. "You didn't." Silence settled between us, but it was not heavy this time. It was honest. After a moment, she asked, "Is it all true? The book?" "Yes." I considered that. "Every part that matters," I said. She nodded again, her eyes moving around the room. "And we're in it?" she asked. I hesitated. Then I answered carefully. "You're part of my life," I said. "So yes, in a way." She exhaled slowly. "Will people know it's us?" she asked. I met her gaze, only if they recognize themselves. That was enough. For now. Later that evening, Mark called. He did not come over. He called. "Another small change." "I heard about the interview," he said. "Yes. You sound different," he added. I smiled faintly. "How so?" "Confident," he said after a moment. I thought about that. Then I said, "I've always been confident." He let out a short breath. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I just never noticed." There it was again. Not denial. Recognition. "We're coming to the launch," he added suddenly. "Launch," I repeated. "The book," he said. "There's going to be some kind of event, right?" I nodded, even though he could not see me. "Yes." "Good," he said. "We'll be there." "We?" "Not out of obligation," Not out of control, but presence. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a moment, letting it all settle. The interviews, the attention, the shift in my family. It was all happening at once, faster than I had imagined. But for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like I was catching up. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was still the same houses, the same quiet rhythm. But inside, everything had changed. Not because I had become someone new, but because I had finally allowed myself to be seen. And now, there was no going back. The invitation arrived in a thick envelope. Not an email, not a message. Something tangible. Something that felt official. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it, tracing my name across the front, as if I needed to confirm it was real. Brent Gallagher, printed cleanly, confidently, as if it had always belonged there. Inside was a single card. Heavy paper, elegant lettering. You are cordially invited to the official launch event of the last chapter by Brent Gallagher. I read it once, then again, then a third time slower. The date, the location, a downtown venue I had passed countless times but never entered. A place meant for people who were seen. I set the card down gently on my desk and leaned back in my chair. This was it. The moment everything I had kept quiet for so long would step into the open. Not just the book. Me. My phone rang before I could think too much about it. "Rachel, did you get it?" she asked. "Yes. How does it feel?" I considered the question. "Real," I said. She laughed softly. "Good, because it is." There was a brief pause. "They're expecting a strong turnout," she added. "Media readers, industry people. It's going to be big. Big." The word settled somewhere deep inside me. "Will I need to speak?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "but we'll prepare you. Nothing overwhelming. Just your story. My story." I looked around the room, at the pages, at the life that had quietly built itself in this space. "I've been telling it for years," I said. "I know," she replied. "Now people are finally ready to listen." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. Not overwhelmed, not nervous, just aware, because this was no longer something I could keep contained. It would step outside these walls, into the world, and my family would be standing there to see it happen. That evening I called Dito see it happen. That evening I called Diane. Not because I had to, because I chose to. "Hi," she answered. "Hi," I said. "I wanted to tell you something." There was a brief pause. "Okay. The launch event is next week," I said. Another pause. Then next week, yes, N. Not because I had to, because I chose to. "Hi," she answered. "Hi," I said. "I wanted to tell you something." There was a brief pause. "Okay. The launch event is next week," I said. Another pause. Then next week, yes. "That soon?" she asked. "Yes." I could hear the shift in her breathing, the realization settling in. "This is really happening?" she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. She hesitated. Then, "We'll be there." Not a question, a statement. I smiled faintly. "I know." Mark called later that night. "I got the details from Diane," he said. "Do you need anything?" There it was, again. Support, not control. "I'm all right," I said. "Are you nervous?" he asked. I thought about that. Then I answered honestly. No. He was quiet for a moment. I would be, he admitted. I wasn't invited into their world before, I said, so I never had to be. And now it feels like they're being invited into mine. He let out a slow breath. That's different, he said. Yes, I agreed. The days leading up to the event moved quickly, faster than I expected. Interviews continued, shorter ones, follow-ups, requests for quotes, photos, even a small video segment that Rachel assured me would be tasteful. Each step felt surreal, not because it was overwhelming, because it felt overdue, like something that had always been waiting quietly for its moment, and now it had arrived. Lily came by the day before the event. She walked into the study as she always did, now her notebook in hand. Are you ready? She asked. For what? I replied, though I knew. For tomorrow. I smiled. I think so. She sat down across from me. I'm not nervous for you, she said. I raised an eyebrow. No, she replied simply. Because you've already done the hard part. And what was that, I asked. Finishing it, she said. I nodded. She was right. The event was not the challenge. The years before it were. That night after she left, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. Not out of nostalgia, out of recognition. This space had held every version of me, the one they thought they knew, and the one they had never seen. Tomorrow, those versions would meet. The next evening, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple dress I had chosen. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress. Just me. I looked at my reflection for a long moment, not searching for flaws, not questioning, just seeing. For the first time in a very long time, I recognized the woman looking back. The drive to the venue was quiet. Mark insisted on driving. Diane sat in the front seat. I sat in the back watching the city move past the window. Familiar streets, unfamiliar destination. When we arrived, the building stood taller than I remembered. Lights glowing, people moving inside, energy. Mark parked the car and turned slightly in his seat. Ready? He asked. I met his eyes. Yes. Diane turned around too, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. We're proud of you, she said. The words landed gently, carefully, as if she understood their weight. I nodded. Thank you. We stepped out of the car together, not as people trying to manage each other, not as people correcting or controlling, but as something else, something new. When the doors opened, the sound reached us first. Voices, laughter, movement, life, and then faces turned. Not toward my children, toward me. Brent Gallagher, a voice called out. I stepped forward. Yes, a woman approached, smiling warmly. It's an honor to meet you, she said. Your work, it means more than you know. More than you know. I glanced back briefly. At Diane, at Mark, at the expressions on their faces as they watched this moment unfold. Not confusion, not doubt, understanding, and something else. Respect. I turned back toward the room, toward the people who had come to hear my story, and for the first time I did not feel like I was stepping into something unfamiliar. I felt like I was stepping into something I had built. Slowly, quietly, completely. And this time, no one was looking away. The applause came in waves, not loud at first, not overwhelming, just steady, real. I stood there just off to the side of the small stage listening to it build. People I had never met were holding my book, flipping through pages that had once existed only in the quiet corners of my life, and for a moment, I did not move, because I needed to feel it, not the attention, the truth of it. This was not something that had been given to me. It was something I had carried for years. Rachel touched my arm lightly. "They're ready for you," she said. I nodded. Then I stepped forward. The lights were brighter than I expected. Not blinding, but enough to remind me that this was not the study, not the quiet safety of a room no one entered. This was open, visible, unavoidable. I reached the center of the stage and looked out. Faces, dozens of them, some smiling, some curious, some already emotional in ways I did not yet understand. And then I saw them. Diane, Mark, Lily, standing together just beyond the first rows, not in the spotlight, but not hidden either. Watching, really watching. I placed my hand lightly on the podium. The microphone waited. The room quieted, and for a brief moment, Mark, Lily, standing together just beyond the first rows, not in the spotlight, but not hidden either, watching, really watching. I placed my hand lightly on the podium. The microphone waited. The room quieted, and for a brief moment I considered everything I could say. All the prepared words, all the practiced lines. Then I let them go, because this was not a performance. It was a continuation. "I didn't think I would ever stand in a room like this," I began. My voice was steady, calm, mine. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't think anyone was listening. A few heads nodded, a few people leaned forward, and I continued. For a long time, my life looked very ordinary from the outside. I was a teacher, a mother, a woman who stayed in the same house, followed the same routines, and didn't make much noise. A soft ripple of understanding moved through the room. But what I learned over time is that just because a life looks quiet doesn't mean it isn't full. Silence, deep, intentional. "I wrote this book over many years," I said. "Not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I was trying to remember." I paused, letting that settle, to remember the people who crossed my path, the moments that changed them, the small decisions that didn't seem important at the time but turned out to matter. I glanced down briefly, then back up, and I realized something while I was writing it. The room held still. That stories don't end when people stop paying attention to them. A few people nodded again, but I wasn't speaking to them anymore. Not entirely. "They end when we decide they're over," I said. And then I looked directly at Diane, at Mark. Not accusing, not blaming, just present. For a long time, I continued the people closest to me believed my story had already been written. The air shifted, subtle, but real, and I let them believe that I added, because it was easier than explaining something they weren't ready to hear. Diane's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Mark stood a little straighter. Lily didn't look away. "But the truth is," I said, my voice steady, "I was still writing." Silence. Complete. Because now they understood. Not just the words, the meaning behind them. I wasn't waiting for permission. I continued, and I wasn't waiting for recognition. I let out a slow breath. I was waiting to finish. The applause came again, stronger this time, but I stayed where I was, because there was one more thing that needed to be said. This book, I said, holding it lightly in my hand, is not about success. The room quieted again. "It's about attention," I explained. "About what happens when we stop looking at the people in our lives as if they're already finished. I turned my gaze back toward the crowd, toward the strangers who had come to listen. And if there's one thing I hope you take with you tonight, it's this. I paused. Just long enough. No one gets to decide when your story ends. The words settled, deep, final. Then I stepped back, and this time, the applause did not build slowly. It rose all at once, full, unfiltered, and I let it. Not because I needed it, because I had earned it. Afterward, people approached one by one, shaking my hand, thanking me, telling me pieces of their own stories as if the words had unlocked something in them. I listened, the way I always had, the way I always would. But eventually, I felt a familiar presence nearby. Diane. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there looking at me in a way she never had before. I didn't know, she said finally. I nodded. I know, she swallowed. You were still becoming something, she added. I smiled faintly. I always was. Mark stepped forward next. He didn't try to explain himself, didn't justify anything. He just said, "That was incredible." I inclined my head slightly. Thank you. Then Lily. She didn't say anything at all. She just hugged me, tightly, and in that moment, I understood something clearly. This was not about proving them wrong. It never had been. It was about showing them what they had missed, and giving them the chance to finally see it. The room emptied slowly, not all at once. People lingered, conversations stretched. Hands continued to reach for mine, voices offering gratitude, admiration. Pieces of themselves they had carried quietly until something in my words gave them permission to speak. I listened. Not as an author, not as someone standing above them, but as I always had, as someone who understood what it meant to go unseen. Eventually, the crowd began to thin. The energy softened. The bright hum of the evening settled into something quieter, more personal. That was when I saw Diane standing near the edge of the room. Not moving, not speaking, just watching me. There was something different in her posture now. Not tension, not uncertainty, something closer to humility. I walked toward her. She didn't step back. She didn't rush forward either. She just stayed where she was, as if she understood that this moment needed to come to her, not the other way around. You were right, she said before I could speak. I tilted my head slightly. About what? She just stayed where she was, as if she understood that this moment needed to come to her, not the other way around. You were right, she said before I could speak. I tilted my head slightly. About what? She swallowed. About everything, she replied. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't hear her, because I wanted her to finish. I thought I knew who you were, she continued. I thought I had you figured out, your life, your choices, your limits. She let out a small breath. And I was wrong. The words were steady, not rushed, not defensive, just true. I nodded once. Yes, I said. She looked down briefly, then back up. I reduced you, she admitted, to something simple, something easy to understand. Her voice wavered slightly, and that wasn't fair. I held her gaze. No, I said gently. It wasn't. She nodded again, accepting it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. But this silence was not uncomfortable. It was necessary, because some things don't need to be filled with words. They just need to exist long enough to be felt. "I'm sorry," she said finally. The apology came without hesitation this time. No conditions, no explanations, just ownership. I took a breath, and I let myself feel it. Not the words, the sincerity behind them. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me searching for what she asked. "For saying it," I replied. "Because not everyone does. Not when it matters. Not when it costs something." She exhaled slowly, as if something she had been carrying had finally shifted. "I don't expect things to go back to the way they were," she said. I shook my head. "They won't," I said. A flicker of worry crossed her face. "But that's not a bad thing," I added. She studied me. "Then what happens now?" she asked. I considered that carefully, because this was not a moment for easy answers. "Now," I said, "we start again." She blinked. "Again?" "Yes," I said, "but not from the beginning." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Then from where?" she asked. "From the truth," I replied. That seemed to settle something inside her. Not completely, but enough. Mark approached a few moments later. He didn't interrupt. He waited. Another change. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "I've been thinking," he said. I turned toward him. "That's usually a good place to start," I replied. A faint smile crossed his face, but it didn't stay long. "I built an idea of you," he said, "based on what I needed at the time." I said nothing, because I understood exactly what he meant. "When I was younger, you were just there," he continued, "solving problems, keeping things steady, making sure everything worked." He glanced around the room. "I never asked what it cost you," he admitted. There it was. The piece that had always been missing. Not just misunderstanding, absence. He stepped closer. "And when things got easier for me," he added. "I assumed that meant things had always been easy for you." I met his eyes. "They weren't," I said. "I know that now," he replied. We stood there for a moment, two people who had lived in the same story, but read completely different versions of it. "I don't expect you to forgive everything right away," he said. I shook my head. "That's not how this works," I replied. He nodded. "I just want to do better," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight, because they weren't about the past. They were about the future. "Then do," I said. "No lecture, no conditions, just clarity." He nodded again, and for the first time, I believed him. Lily joined us shortly after. She slipped her hand into mine, as she had done when she was much younger. "I liked your speech," she said softly. I smiled. "Thank you." "You didn't sound nervous," she added. "I wasn't," I said. She looked up at me. "Why not?" I thought about that. Then I answered honestly, because I wasn't trying to prove anything I said. I was just telling the truth. She nodded as if that made perfect sense, and to her, it did. We stood there together for a while longer, not as a perfect family, not as a repaired one, but as something real, something that had finally been stripped of assumptions and rebuilt on something stronger, understanding, respect, and truth. As we walked out of the building later that night, the air felt different, cooler, sharper, clear. Diane walked beside me, Mark just behind. Lily still holding my hand. No one rushed ahead. No one tried to lead. We moved together, not out of habit, but by choice. When we reached the car, Diane paused. "Mom," she said. I turned toward her. "Yes." She hesitated. Then she asked the question that mattered more than anything she had said before. "Can I read it?" she asked. I smiled. "Of course," I said. She nodded, her expression softening. "Not because it's yours," she added quickly, "but because I want to understand." I met her eyes. "That's the only reason that matters," I said, and in that moment, I knew. This was not just the end of something. It was the beginning of a relationship we had never truly had. One built not on assumptions, not on roles, but on truth. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not louder, just settled, as if something long unresolved had finally found its place. I woke earlier than usual, not out of habit, but because sleep no longer felt like something I needed to escape into. For the first time in years, I felt present in my own life, without the weight of being misunderstood pressing down on every moment. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stood by the window. The same street, the same houses, but I was not the same person standing there. And neither was the life inside this home. A few hours later, there was a knock at the door. Soft, measured, not rushed. I opened it to find Diane standing there alone. No urgency, no agenda, just her. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She hesitated slightly, then held up something in her hand. My book. Already opened, already marked with small, folded corners. "I started reading," she said. I stepped aside, letting her in. "And I asked?" She walked slowly into the living room, taking a seat, as if she understood now that this space belonged to more than just her expectations. "It's not what I thought," she said. I sat across from her. "What did you think it would be?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "I thought it would be about proving something," she admitted. "And it's not." She shook her head. "No," she said. "It's about understanding." I nodded. "That's closer." She looked down at the pages in her hands. "There's a part," she said quietly, "about a woman who keeps helping people even when no one notices." I didn't respond when no one notices. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. "And she doesn't stop," Diane continued. "Not because anyone thanks her, but because she believes it matters anyway." Her voice softened. "Was that you?" I met her eyes. "Yes." She swallowed. "I didn't see that. I didn't need to." "And she doesn't stop," Diane continued. "Not because anyone thanks her, but because she believes it matters anyway." Her voice softened. "Was that you?" I met her eyes. "Yes." She swallowed. I didn't see that, she said. "I know, and I should have," she added. I leaned forward slightly. "Maybe," I said, "but you see it now." She nodded. "That has to count for something," I added. She let out a small breath. "It does." We sat in silence for a moment. Not empty, not heavy, just honest. "I kept thinking about something you said," she continued. "What was that?" "That no one gets to decide when your story ends." I smiled faintly. "I meant it." She nodded again. "I think I thought your story had already reached its limit," she admitted. "And now?" She looked around the room, then back at me. Now I think I just stopped reading too soon. That stayed with me, because it was the most honest thing she had said yet. Later that afternoon, Mark came by. Not with questions, not with concerns, with something else. He carried a small box in his hands. "I found these," he said, setting it on the table. I opened it slowly. Inside were old photographs. Not the ones displayed on walls. The ones that had been tucked away, forgotten. Moments of my life that had existed quietly, just like everything else. "You kept these?" I asked. He shook his head. "They were in my attic," he said. I didn't even remember they were there. I picked one up. A younger version of me, standing beside a group of students, smiling, alive in a way that had nothing to do with recognition. "You were always doing something," Mark said softly. I looked up at him. "Yes. I just never asked what it meant," he added. I placed the photo back in the box. "You're asking now," I said. He nodded. "That's what matters." He stayed for a while. Not long, but long enough. Long enough to sit in the same space without trying to change it, without trying to define it. Just being there. That evening, Lily came over again. She walked in with her notebook as she always did now, but this time she didn't sit right away. She looked around the room, then at me. "Everything feels different," she said. I smiled. "Because it is." She thought about that. "Did you change?" she asked. I shook my head. "No." "Then what did she ask?" I leaned back slightly. "They did," I said. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she sat down and opened her notebook. "Can I read you something new?" she asked. "Of course." And she did. Her voice steady, her words growing stronger each time. And as I listened, I realized something quietly profound. This was the last chapter they thought I had already lived. But it was never the end. It was the beginning of something none of us had understood yet. When she finished, she looked up at me. "Do you think it's good?" she asked. I smiled. "I think it's honest," I said, "and that's better." She smiled back, and in that moment, I knew this story would continue. Not in the way people expected, not in the way it had been defined before, but in a way that was finally true. That night, after everyone had gone home, I returned to my study. The manuscript lay open on my desk. Complete, finished, but not ended. Because stories like this don't end. They change. They expand. They are passed on. I picked up my pen one last time, not to add to the book, but to write something else. A final line, not for the readers, for myself. I am still here. I set the pen down and closed the notebook. And for the first time in a very long time, there was nothing left to prove, only something to live. Sometimes the greatest misunderstanding in life is not what others say about us, but what they fail to see. We live in a world where people are often defined by what is visible, convenient, and easy to understand. Roles replace identities. Assumptions replace curiosity. And slowly, without even realizing it, we begin to accept a version of ourselves that was never fully true. But the truth is this: your story is never finished just because someone stops paying attention. There will be moments when even the people closest to you believe they know everything about who you are. They may think they have reached the final chapter of your life, neatly wrapped and understood. But only you hold the pen. Only you decide whether there is more to write. And sometimes the most powerful chapters are the ones written in silence, The ones no one notices until they are finally revealed. Brent's journey reminds us that recognition is not what gives a life value. Truth does. Persistence does. Quiet resilience does. And when the moment comes for your story to be seen, it will not matter how long it took. It will only matter that you never stopped writing it. If this story touched you, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt like someone misunderstood your life or stopped seeing your growth too soon? Share your story in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our worth, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and yours might be one of them.